So where are you recording from today, Pablo?
Well, I am at my favorite independent bookstore in the whole world, Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, where I live. They even gave me a T-shirt. I signed 850 copies of my book today through their literary foundation, which is really cool.
800 copies. And we are recording this episode about a week after the book came out.
Yep, we got some news. We got some updates.
It's a New York Times bestseller. Did you see that
Y-
coming?
I so I'll tell you what, I was hustling, and I've been hustling for a minute. And I think that all you can hope is like you just try to get the word out, try to get the book out, and try to get it into as many hands as possible, and like share the story about the book, and then you just kind of let the rest take care of itself. And I had just finished my last event in Boston, after being gone for several months, like back and forth, and I went to this celebration for this wonderful organization called Meet the Writers in New York, and so I kind of went from Boston to New York just to celebrate this, and then I was going to have dinner with my publisher as just kind of like a cap off to this like really long trip, celebrating this book, promoting the book and talking to kids about the book all over the country. And I'm talking to my wife. I'm in the hotel, and all of a sudden I get my publicist, and then my publisher texts me, "Dude, you did it." And I said, "What did I do?" And they're like, "You're number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list." And I was like, I think I shed these tears of like exhaustion and joy and like the grind. I mean, you know how it is, man. You grind for a long time, and it's like, and then um, you get this kind of wonderful validation from this, like as authors, we're all kind of like trying to like hit that list at some point. I'm not saying we all are, but it's like it's a measure of some kind of success, and so it was just kind of cool to see all that grind and all that hard work just kind of like be validated in that way.
Well, for our listeners who haven't heard of the book and haven't read of the book, give us a little synopsis of A Hero's Guide to Summer Vacation.
So, A Hero's Guide to Summer Vacation. I like to start by saying this book took me 5 years to write, and I think that for educators and kids and anybody who's really listening, I think it's important to understand that, like, you know, this this process was one of like moments that I had this assignment to turn this book in, equal to like what you would give one of your students an assignment to write something. And I just kept getting hit with really sad things happening in my life throughout the course of those 5 years. My wife lost her 3 grandparents. One of my best friends passed away. My brother's wife's sister passed away. Like all of this sort of sadness that was kind of
Yeah.
eclipsing this process of trying to finish this book. And I just didn't want to do it. And I like to talk to the kids about like, look, sometimes like if you don't want to do an assignment, it's not because you're necessarily being lazy. It's because maybe there's just something going on inside that it's hard for you to finish. Maybe you're feeling sad. Maybe you're feeling angry about something. And I think that this book has become very much about like our feelings, like the things that we feel, and that sometimes are hard for us to express. And so when I ended up coming together to having to finish, because I will tell the kids the same thing. I'm like, you have an assignment, it's hard, you procrastinate, you don't do it because of whatever's happening, but you still have to turn it in
Yeah.
or you're going to fail or you're not going to pass the grade. And so I was like, I had to turn this book in. And when I finally did, and I finally just pushed myself through and I put all these elements together through all these drafts that I wrote over the years, and I ended up piecing together this road trip as a sort of like anchor for me to tell the story that I wanted to tell. So I was like, I know that I literally have to get these characters from point A to point B, and then use all these other drafts that I wrote that I didn't turn in over the years. I used all these drafts to kind of like, okay, let's make this into the story that it is. And as I did that, I realized that I was trying to tell a story about how one confronts the feelings that they're feeling through different ways, like whether we express them through writing, through reading, through drawing, through talking it out, through yelling, screaming, crying, doing all these things, and like how sometimes like those emotions help us to process all these things that are inside of us. Um, and then of course it's like how I wanted to put four narrators in it because the main character Gonzalo, and then is one narrator, then his abuelo Alberto, who's a famous children's book author, and he's another narrator. And then his mom Veronica is another narrator. And then there's a fourth narrator who kind of addresses the reader directly. And he's kind of cheeky and obnoxious sometimes. And I was like, well, who is that person? I'm like, well, obviously I feel like, I had to put an element of humor into this very serious story, because that is also a part of how one can manage feelings of sadness and feelings of grief. Sometimes we use humor to do that. And so I kind of wanted to just add all these elements together to write this story and then sort of create this road trip as a way to explore those things.
One of the
Yeah.
characters, one of the characters that I was so intrigued by is a character who is not, I guess, alive in the book, but you had to write about a father who has passed away.
Hmm.
And I guess I've never just talked to an author about that, but like, what is it like to like include a character and write about a character and help us to get to know a character that is so important to the story, but is also not like physically in the story?
So that's a great question. It's kind of like the way that the character Gonzalo, who's lost his father, it's that sort of feeling of like he has not yet understood how to process the loss, and his attachment to the loss is how I've let my father down, right? So and this is these green eyes that are chasing him across the sky, that he feels like they're going to drown him, quite literally drown him in, and the eyes emerge from the fog, and he feels like, gosh, I've let him down. He almost failed science, which was his father's favorite subject. He's not an environmentalist like his father is. He's not this, climate scientist like his father is. He's like, he doesn't observe the world the same way he does. But as when his father was alive, his father would take him on these sort of scientific explorations about like, look, this is what's happening to, the lakes that are drying out along California. Like, this is what's happening to the leatherback sea turtle. This is what's happening to. So he's looking at all these things and saying like, oh, okay, I'm following my dad along while he's alive, and now he's passed and he's like stuck. He's like, I can't do it like he does, and I can't do it, and so I'm disappointed. And so this kind of idea of the dad being this figure that looms above him, these green eyes that are quite literally following him everywhere, where he's just terrified. He's like, I know, I don't want to look at these eyes. I don't want to have to face them because I know what's going to happen when I do. Right. And so it becomes this sort of this conversation with how he has to finally face these eyes and then kind of come to terms with it. Might not be what you're expecting, you know?
Yeah.
But he's afraid of it. And so it's very much about this relationship that he never really had enough time to develop with his father when he was alive. Right. So he was like just emerging into his teenhood and then kind of figuring out who he is. So those are conversations that when you have a parent that you're trying to like figure out, like, hey, I don't want to be called G Bear anymore. I don't want to be that nickname anymore. I want to be this. You have your parent that when they're alive, but then there's like, if they tragically pass, what happens then? What are those conversations? You never get to have them. And so they sort of like linger around saying like, gosh, I never had a chance to say this. And so that's kind of what he's processing. And I tried to stay true to what that would be like for a 14-year-old kid. Like, what are they going through? And what do they feel ashamed of that like, my dad passed. I don't know how to say I'm not like my dad, or I don't like the things that my dad does, and you feel this guilt. And so there's kind of like all these emotions that are kind of taking place. So that's kind of where I established that relationship with dad.
It's so interesting because as a teacher, you often see so often kids trying to live up to their parents' expectations of them,
Yeah.
and just the burden that can be on a child. and then to see it at the level where this kid's father is no longer around, so like still having to, I guess, rise to, like you said, feeling the guilt for not maybe measuring up to what he thought his father was, is
Yeah,
man,
and we're you and
that's
I are both
intense.
fathers. We're both
Mm-hmm.
fathers, and it's like, and we like we're looking at our kids, and and there's I'm always constantly thinking, I'm like, am I setting too many expectations for my own kids? And like, at what point do you, like, do you try to figure out, like, what are they feeling about those expectations? Like, what are they feeling
Mm-hmm.
for themselves, and how are they kind of coming into their own? My daughter is going to be graduating high school on Sunday, and I'm like, I'm not ready. I'm trying not to think about it so much. Um, but like, she wants to pursue art. Like, she wants to be an artist, just like her dad. And like, there's, there's a level that I've tried to instill in her about, like, the expectations of what that means. Right. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to put too much where she feels like, if I'm going to let my father down, I'm going to let dad down. Um, so, I'm sure that you've experienced the same thing with your kids.
Yeah.
It's like, it's that feeling of like, you do want to set a standard for them, right? You do want to
Mm-hmm.
say, like, yeah, this is something, but then at one point, where do they come in and say, like, well, this is what my journey is, and I can respect and love your expectations and what you have done for yourself, but this is now my path that I have to take. And that's quite literally what Gonzalo is doing. He's like, he's letting go of this feeling that he's had, that's kind of lingered about, these green eyes that are chasing him across the country, literally.
That's so interesting. But today is actually my oldest kid's last day of high school.
Oh
So
my God. Oh,
we're
mine
kind of
too. My
we're in the
daughter
same
too.
boat
Oh my
there.
God. I
Yeah,
can't. I cannot. Oh
we're in the
my
same
God.
boat.
I'm not
And it's so
ready.
interesting, like thinking about like not trying to put these expectations on our kids and letting them live their lives. But here I am at 43 years old, and my dad is 73 years old, and I feel like I've spent my entire life trying to make him proud, and not because of
Yeah.
him, but just like, I guess when you look up to people that you love and that are raising you, you strive to live a life that they would be proud of, which is
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it's a thing, like with my dad too. It's, my dad is, he's had this incredible life of, he was a counter-revolutionary in Cuba. Like, he was thrown in prison fighting to win democracy back, and he's had this like epic life. I mean, he knew he knew Ernest Hemingway. Like, this is like you're just like, wow, this like larger than life, and you just hope that at one point, whatever you're doing, that you can live up to that sort of
Yeah.
standard, this legacy, this legend that he's created for himself. But then
Mm-hmm.
you kind of realize at one point, there's no, that's, they're looking at it like, you don't have to chase that
Yeah.
at all. They're proud of us for like what we've become and the things that we've done. Even though my father's very soft spoken, he doesn't really talk. I remember he told my mom because he told my mom, like, my mom told me, she was like, he's very proud of you. And I said, why? He doesn't tell me. And she goes, well, he told me once, he says, I'm so proud of him. And when my mom
Oh,
said, well, and when my mom said, well, why don't you tell him that? And he says, pa que se infle la cabeza. So he's like, why? So his head gets big? I don't want his head to get too big. So, that's kind of like
yeah.
so, yeah,
Isn't
man,
it weird
it's,
to now be the father? Like, right? Like we were, looking up to our fathers, and now like we have adults that we've raised.
I know and you see, it's like, I think of, like, yeah, the kids are all right. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
they do some remarkable things. Like my daughter, I came home from being on the road for literal months, and my wife holding down the fort, like, just like, and she, my oldest, she had her final show, and the graduation preparation, and my son is graduating 8th grade, and my little one is finishing kindergarten. It's like this madness, and then on top of that, my wife is like running her business, so it's like all these things.
Yep.
And like, and Penelope says, like, she tells Rebecca, she's like, Mom, do you want me to just do the groceries today? You know? And it was just so bizarre, she's like, just, and then of course she's like, just give me your credit card and I'll do the groceries.
Yeah.
you know?
No, I think that's so important because, like, you want them to be happy, and they
Yeah.
do all of these amazing things. But when they say something as simple as like they notice a need and they're like, "Do you need me to get the groceries?" Like that's when you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, like they're going to be okay. We did something right."
Yeah, that's right.
It's
Yeah,
cool.
it's so cool, man. It's like it's just it's a special thing, and when you're writing a story, like you're trying to channel that, right? Like you're trying to channel these sort of ideas that like they're all right. Like they're gonna be good, you know.
Mm,
Like they're gonna stumble through things sometimes, and
yeah,
and then they kind of figure it out, you know. It's really
yeah.
cool.
So the last thing I want to talk about is just this amazing grandfather, abuelo character that you have created and the relationship between him and Gonzalo. Can you just talk about, I mean, I really like would put him on, like, if there was a Mount Rushmore of grandfathers in children's literature, like this guy's on it. Like
Thank you. Yeah.
he is, I guess the kid, as the kids would say, like he is him, right? Like,
Yeah.
so tell us about the grandfather and
Oh
this
man.
relationship and their journey through the book to really get to know each other.
You know, I love. I've always I love a character who's like unexpectedly so loving, you know, so careful in his approach of how he expresses and like how helpful he is, how wonderful he is, right? Um, and like like the idea of how Gonzalo starts to see that throughout the book, like, oh wow, my grandfather's like actually a very kind person who's gone through a lot, right? Um, but I kind of wanted to throw that all on its head a little bit and just kind of really create this character who just doesn't seem to like anybody at all, you know. And how many times have we meet somebody that seems kind of distant or like grumpy or just like, oh gosh, okay, whatever, and then we don't really take the time to say, well, what makes them grumpy? Like, why are they sad? Like, and then using the idea that the grandfather is a very successful, very famous children's book author. I mean, you're talking about like, you know, 100 million copies sold kind of thing, you know, like he's very wealthy. And so you kind of think like, well, wealth should clear everything up, shouldn't it? Like, but it doesn't. And there's a hole that's missing, but he's put up this wall, right? Partially because he doesn't want to bother his only child, his daughter, Veronica, and or Gonzalo, you know, so he just kind of put up this wall and just let them do their thing, you know? Um, and so I kind of wanted to play with that idea of like, what does it mean to, you know, be that successful, but also have that sort of barrier that you're kind of like that, like the people closest to you, your grandson and your only child, your daughter, feel this distance. Like you're like, well, why aren't you closer? Right. And you don't know why. And so you meet him at first, you're like, oh my God, he's very grumpy. It's like really grumpy. He's, he's just like, get in the car, let's go. You know, like your food's getting cold, you know, like it's just like that. And like Gonzalo's kind of scared of him and doesn't know what to talk to him about. And there's this whole wonderful exchange in the book, in the text message between mom and Gonzalo. And I love, like, you know, with your kids, I'm sure like when you text them, they do these like one word responses, all lowercase, you know. I literally took that from my son's text message exchanges. And it's like, you know, you're going with him on the trip. No, mom, please, you know, PLS, you know, it's like this whole text exchange. And it's like this idea of like, he's kind of scary. I don't want to go with him. And then as he goes, he starts sort of getting to know him and realizing like, oh, there's a lot more to this sort of facade that Abuelo's showing. He doesn't even call him Abuelo. He says my grandfather throughout much of the book. And it is because to me, the term Abuelo or Abuela is a very connected term to like
Mm.
someone that I love. I loved my grandparents, my abuelos, with every inch of my soul. You know, my abuela and my abuelo were like my everything. And so the idea of calling someone abuelo or abuela is very powerful for me. And so Gonzalo very intentionally calls him my grandfather the entire, you know, for a lot of
Mm.
the book because he feels this is, but as he starts getting to know him and connecting the books that he's written to his own tragic stories and his own story of survival, And then seeing how like he's going and giving these books to these individuals with special needs, and he's like going and handing these books to like this gas station clerk, and making sure that his mom gets it in Spanish, and like doing all these things. Like, the kid starts to kind of, oh, there's a lot more to my grandfather than meets the eye. And then when you get to the point where he's like, oh, I think we're softening, and when you do, he gets hard again, right? And so now they have to work through this sort of like, I actually think I care about you a lot, but now you're back to this sort of hardening, and why. And so then what leads to this like friction that ends up in this climactic moment where they're like, you know, like at each other, and then kind of like basically the final release between,
Mm.
like the final release of this tension that gives them the opportunity to like move forward, right? Understanding each other. And so like, I wanted an abuelo who was complex. I wanted someone who, if you read this character, there's more than meets the eye. There's reasons for his behavior, for why he is the way he is. And if you give him a chance, you might
Mm.
discover something about him that might make you understand why he's that way. And in turn, if you have felt that way, like how many kids, sometimes you have a kid in your classroom and they're just kind of like doing that, and they're just angry, or they're just like, just leave me alone, like, they'll snap, and you're like, well, what's behind there? Like, are they just
Yeah.
lashing out? Are they just trying to cause trouble? Or is there something going on that's deeper than
Mm.
that? And I think that that's what I wanted to explore with the grandfather. So it's more of like the kid is seeing that, rather than like, oh, the kid is the one that's like ornery and grumpy. And then the grandpa is like, oh, come on,
Yeah.
let's get yourself out of it. So I wanted it to be like the kids kind of like discovering, like, oh,
Mm.
there's more to these layers. There's a lot more layers to my grandfather than just this sort of like hardened shell.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where it all kind of manifested and came about.
Last question. In
Okay.
30 seconds or less, 30 seconds or less, what is your hope for A Hero's Guide to Summer Vacation?
Man, I hope that it's a book that families can read together. I hope that, like, you can get a grandpa, grandma, a mom, dad, like, kids together, and just like read it together, and sort of like have the conversations about it. There's a lot of like literary elements in it. There's obviously the tropes of like the hero's journey and all that stuff, and then the different narrators. But it's like, I tried to write a family book, right?
Mm.
A book that has the layers that every reader can get something from it, right? And it's because I had so many different layers of this story that I went through, and so when I put it together, I was like, I want a book that many different kinds of readers can read, not just the middle grade audience, but just anybody, right? If you want to sit there and read it with your kid and be like, okay, let's talk about this. Or if a kid just wants to read it and sort of like is feeling frustrated about something, or trying to understand something about a parent or a friend or a relative or something, that they can read it and be like, oh, that may be, there's maybe something deeper to the conversation that I'm getting, and maybe I should dig a little
Yeah.
more. And that's yeah, that's what I'm hoping.